Hello there. So, first of all, I would like to apologize for how long this has been taking. I've been fairly busy these past couple days, and past couple weeks, honestly. So, without further ado, let's start with this next lesson. So, the topic of the lesson is basic tools. So, of course, we're gonna learn how to manipulate some of the models inside the viewport. First of all, we have the grab tool. To activate the grab tool, you select what you want to grab, and then you press the hotkey G. It allows you to move the object however you want around the viewport. And, well, yeah, it allows you to move the object. Next, we have the scale tool. To activate it, you press S. It allows you to scale the object up or scale it down to be smaller, larger, or bigger. Next, we have the rotate tool, which allows you to rotate the object in the viewport. And yeah. Now then, one of the things that I'm going to be that is sometimes important. There are some things that are sometimes very important and sometimes not very important in Blender modeling. One of those things is precision. Now, if you're making something like, I don't know, a tree, for example, or some sort of somewhat realistic render where your precision doesn't really matter, then, well, obviously precision doesn't matter. You can scale up and scale down however you want to make stuff look more visually appealing. However, in the case of something like Roblox Studio, which is what I use Blender mainly for at the current moment, having precision is a very important aspect of modeling, because otherwise you get all these little artifacts such as I don't know, cuts between the different models, between the different assets, which if I have a example I will throw up now. Now, sure, I've been saying that precision is important, and you might have noticed that while I was grabbing it or rotating or scaling, it didn't seem to be, well, very accurate. However, there are some ways to constrain the way that you move, rotate, and scale objects when you activate the tool. So let's use grab as an example for now. So grab, normally when you grab an object, it moves however you want it. However, if after pressing grab you press X, Y, or Z, it will constrain the object to move along that axis. So right now it's constrained around, it is constrained along the X-axis. If I press Y, it will be constrained along the Y-axis. And if I press Z, it will be constrained around the Z-axis. Furthermore, if you have it already constrained, or if you don't have it constrained, and you press Shift Z, for example, you will be able to move the object relative to both the X and the Y plane at the same time. So in this case, the object will never move up, but it will move side to side. If I press Shift Z again, it will disable that, although sometimes it does weird things. Shift X will constrain along the Y and Z axis. So it will move up and down, but it will never move along the X axis. Once again, if I press Shift X, apparently nothing happens. If I press Shift Y, it will move along the X and Z axis, but not move along the Y axis. And yeah, that's that. This also applies to stuff like rotation. So I can constrain this to rotate along the X axis, the Y axis, the Z axis. Or I can also constrain it to scale only along the Z axis, the X axis, and the Y axis. Now, so far, in the previous lesson, we have covered stuff like setting the location precisely using the properties up here, setting the rotation to be precise using stuff up here, and setting the scale to be precise using the properties window up here. Whoops, you don't want to do that, by the way. You don't want to set the scale to 0. Pretty much ever. Now then, once again, as you may have noticed, if I move it along the x-axis, it's not really precise. Like, if you look at the top left of my screen right now, it will tell you exactly how much I am moving. Or in the case of rotating, how many degrees, or scaling, how much of a factor you are applying to. It will show that information up in the top left corner. Now, if I wanted to move the box, the cube right now, along the x-axis, for 3 units, sure, I could, you know, eyeball it, try and align it as close as possible. Or, instead, after pressing GX, I can also start typing in numbers. So if I type in the number 3, it will move it 3 units over on the x-axis. Or if I press, at this point negative, or the minus, it will flip it over the Y, it will flip it into the other direction. So right now it's registering as -3. And I can just do that, well, forever really, but there's no point. So, say I wanted to do the same thing for rotation about the x-axis for 15 degrees. That would be GX15. Or, sorry, RX15. And see, now it is rotated 15 degrees around the x-axis. Or if I wanted to, so right now the dimensions of the cube are 1 by 1 by 1. If I wanted to scale it up to be, I don't know, a height of 10, for example, I could press S, Z, and then type in 10. And it will scale it to by a factor of 10. Now, for scaling, it is important to remember that it is a factor of 10. It doesn't mean that it will increase it to that size on the Y or on the Y-X or Z axis. So if I press ZX or SZ10 again, instead of setting it to be of a height 10, it will instead take what the previous height was, which was 10, and then multiply it by 10. So in total, we have a cube, or a rectangular prism at this point, which is of a height 100 meters. Now, next. Say you have several objects, right? Oh, by the way, to clone an object, you select the object that you want to clone, and you can press Shift-D, and it will clone it in its place, and you can drag several of those out. Now, let's say that you want to, I don't know, align this face of this cube along with this face of this cube. Well, up here, we have this tool that is called Snap To. You can change it to snap by increment, to snap to vertex, to snap to an edge, to snap to a face, to snap to a volume, which I'm honestly not entirely sure what that does. I've never used it. And then a couple other options. So, in the case where I want to shift this over on the y-axis to snap to this face, first of all, I can enable this tool by pressing Shift-Tab. There we go. It enables this tool. And then I typically keep it in vertex mode unless I have a reason not to. So I switch to vertex mode. And then I press G, Y, and then I hover over the vertex that I want to align it to. So in this case, since the tool is set to closest, it will snap the closest point on this cube, which in this case is either of these 4 edges. And it will snap it to this particular point. Now, as you saw just now, if you don't constrain it, it will try and move the closest point, which is this vertex here, to the vertex that I highlight over. So if I do that, it will snap it to very, very nicely. Next, we are going to be talking about some other tools. But before I do that, I want to point out a very, very important thing. The scale property on the tool does matter. So right now, the dimensions of this cube are 2 by 2 by 2, right? But if I, for example, increase this to a massive size, say, I don't know, 100 or 100, there we go. And then I scale this, and then I reset the scale, and then I scale it back down to 2. And then I start trying to do something on it, like bevel it, it will act weird. Very weird. So, as you may have seen, in order to reset the scale or rotation or location, you press Control A and it opens up this apply menu, in which case you can apply either the location, rotation, or scale individually, or all transformations at the same time, or just rotation and scale. In this case, I'm going to reset only the scale. Then I'm going to scale it down by a factor of 0.5 in order to decrease it to dimensions of 1 by 1 by 1, and then once again reset the scale. Now we can continue talking about the other tools. Remember, for various of these, for a lot of these tools, the scale of the object does matter. So, first of all, bevel. We enter edit mode, and we select the edges that we want to bevel. To bevel, you press Control B, and then you drag your mouse, and it causes these bevels to appear. Now, as you may have seen in previous tools or in previous lectures, you will occasionally have a little window down here that opens. If you click on it, it will allow you to define the different properties of this of the previous tool execution. So, for example, if I change the offset, it will change the offset of the bevel. So in this case, once again applying the principle of precision, I can change it to be 0.25, and that means that if I were to measure the distance from here to there, it will be 0.25. At least I'm assuming, right? If I measure it now. Whoops. I think I may have crashed, but okay, never mind. Blender is fine. Yeah, so it is going to be 0.25 from here to here, and you know, all that good stuff. Next, we are going to be talking about inset. Now, a lot of people like to misuse inset. Or specifically, they like to misuse the combination of inset and extrude, which will be, a better practice will be covered in the optimization lesson. But to inset, you select whichever face you want to inset. Like, for example, I want to inset these two faces, and I press I, and then I drag the mouse inward. Now, as you can see, it does this sort of weird effect. If I were to demonstrate on one face what it does this, right? So it takes sort of a clone of the face, it makes a smaller copy, and then it connects the two together. Now, what if you wanted to inset a bunch of faces? Like, what if I wanted to inset all of these faces at the same time? Well, if I select all of them, I can't do that unless I enable the individual feature. As soon as I do that, it breaks a little bit, but that's because I set the inset factor to be too high. So now it will individually inset every face that I had selected. And once again, I can change the thickness here in the Properties tab so that it is exact. Now, actually, no, I'm going to redo that. Now, I'm going to extrude this face. What extrude means is, this is what extrude does. It sort of creates extra geometry from the face that you selected in the direction of the normal vector. Or if you remove the constraint, or even just do that, you can move it around. Now, what if I wanted to, for example, I don't know, extrude all of these faces at once? So, in this case, I can press Alt-E, and it will give me several options. Extrude faces will extrude faces in, well, one general direction, which in this case I do not want. Extrude faces along normals will take the individual normals of every face and extrude the faces in that direction. So in this case, see how they are all extruding in their own direction, and of course I can also do the opposite and sort of extrude in the negative direction. And then finally, extrude individual faces is somewhat similar, but it will act a bit differently depending on the position of the center point over here. So the center point is something that dictates how it's sort of like, well, it's the point of origin for any model. If I move my cursor over here and then I set the origin to be at the cursor, so now the origin of this cube is over here, and then I try and repeat that same action of extrude individual faces, you will see that it apparently does the exact same thing. Interesting. Okay, whatever. So, what I meant when I said that people like to abuse inset and extrude. So, this seems fairly logical. Like, let me just undo all this. So let's assume that you want to, you know, create some extra geometry here. I don't know, maybe you're making a snowman. A blocky cuboid snowman. So, right now, this action is creating a whole bunch of unnecessary geometry because you have 1, 2, 3, 4 faces, and then another 1, 2, 3, 4 faces. So, what you might want to do, which some of you might have already seen, is you want to take these faces and you want to delete them. To delete faces, or delete vertices, or delete edges, you press X. It opens up this menu, and it also allows you to dissolve, by the way, which I will be covering slightly later. And you can delete those faces. Now, you can select the 4 vertices, or you can do pretty much the same thing by selecting 2 edges that also share an edge, and then you can press F. Also, apparently my screencast has decided not to work anymore, which is fun. So that will now create a cube, or a square, and no extra geometry will be used, which is very nice for optimization. So I will just repeat the same thing here. And of course, you may say, hey, Xander, this means that this isn't connected. And yeah, you're absolutely right. But in the cases like this, if I was to export this as a single mesh, that just really wouldn't matter at all. Next, loop cut and select. So, occasionally you might want to, I don't know, create a ring around this box here. Now, instead of, you know, just taking the knife tool, which is activated by pressing K, and then, you know, just dragging and doing stuff like this, which, please, for the love of God, don't do, because it creates n-gons, which are not good in the slightest. You can press Control R and then hover over the middle here. Now, depending on how you hover, it will cut in a different direction. See? Furthermore, if you use the mouse wheel, it will increase the amount of loop cuts that are made. In this case, I will make 2 loop cuts in order to make that ring. Now, after you press it once, you might notice that it is still sticking to your cursor. This is the sort of loop slide mode. So, in order to cancel it, you either press right click in order to well, have it be put to the default position, or you can move it and then press primary mouse to leave it there. So in this case, since I want this ring to be lower, closer to the bottom, I will move it down, and then I will press main button. So now I have this this nice little ring. Now, in the case of you having a lot of parts, like say, oh, I don't know, instead of this snowman here, you have a cylinder. And let's assume that this cylinder, like, you're making some really cool geometry here, right? And like, I don't know, let's assume it's a barrel of a gun, right? And you're creating some really cool geometry. Like, you want to put some really cool features on this. So you loop cut this. Oh no, I've accidentally deselected it. Now, instead of having to select every single edge individually, Blender is an intellectual. They have inserted a tool to be able to select this circle. To use that tool, it is called Loop Select, which may sound kind of familiar because that is also what which is familiar from Loop Cut and Select. You press and hold Alt, and then you select which edge you want to use as a reference, and it will select around that edge. Now, it can occasionally be a little bit finicky, so you might have to play around with it, but that is generally how it works. Next, you move it up. I still have the snap to mode, so it just sort of snapped all the way up to the top, and then I press G and constrain it along the Z-axis and move it slightly down. Let's say 0.25 in the negative direction. And then I just, repeat that same action for the bottom one. Now let's say that, oh hey, I want to, put little holes into this, like this. And, doing that is all cool and all, but it takes way too long and is often, well, pretty imprecise. So, as some of you may remember, in the first lecture, I instructed you to go into your Properties tab and change the spacebar action from play to search. We will now use that. So you press space to activate the search function, and then you want to type in checker. You will find checker deselect. So this really easily just deselects every other edge, and there are some properties to play, or every other face, and there are some very fun properties to play around here with. And then using our previous knowledge about how to extrude along normals, you can press Alt-E, and then you can extrude inward. So this sort of creates that effect. And then obviously you can also do some really cool stuff with insetting. And oh no. Well, oh yes, actually. In this case, you want to connect these two circles together, but once again, doing it one edge at a time is very, very inefficient. This is where bridging edge loops comes in. So, what you can do is you can Alt select this to select that entire loop, and then Alt Shift select to also select this edge. So now you have two edges selected, this one and that one. And now in the search box, you type in bridge, and it should be the very first thing. You press enter, and it bridges everything for you. Blender is amazing. Also, I think I did a oops. There we go. So, once again, you might. So this is a pretty nice example, I think, of how efficient Blender can be. And obviously, you can do stuff like shading and smooth, which in this case doesn't look as good. But once again, there is a tool for that. So right now, you can see a bunch of little artifacts from how it looks, and it from all the shading, and it just looks generally pretty bad. So what you do is, well, first of all, you keep it like this. Next, you go over here into the object data properties. It looks like this green triangle here. You click on that. You open up the normals tab, and you enable auto smooth. Blammo. You also have this angle property here. Changing the angle property will determine what angle is necessary in order to what the maximum angle for smoothing is. So in this case, because there is, for example, less than a 30-degree angle between this and this, it will smooth them into sort of a uniform shape. If I increase this, so right now this won't really do anything until it reaches above 90, and once it reaches above 90, it just sort of implodes. So we'll just keep it at 30, but it's good to know that you can do that sort of stuff. Also, let's I don't know, let's assume that you have this, whoops, turn that off. Let's assume your angle is at 45, or hell, even 60? Yeah, haha, there we go. So let's assume that you have some sort of weird shape, and you know, you don't want to change the angle for the entire model because it'll screw something up. But you still want this edge to be very sharp. What you can do is in edit mode, you can loop select that edge. You can right click, and then you can enable mark sharp. And this will, well, mark it sharp. And it will work as though the auto smooth is applied to it, and everything is great with the world. Now, another thing to note is island select. So let's assume that you once again have a cube, and I don't know, once again you inset everything and then you extrude, not in that direction, you extrude everything along normals, and then you know, you select this face, and then you know you create a face, but you want to select this entire part. Well, in the case of, oh, I don't know, if I just you know, inset everything and then extrude it in its own different directions. Now this is a pretty cool shape, not gonna lie. But let's say you want to move this entire thing. Now pressing A is not an option because this is still part of this part is still part of this part. But once again, Blender has come up with a pretty cool solution. It is called Island Select. What Island Select will do is it will go through every single vertice above what you are hovering and make sure and select every single vertice that is connected to that. So if I hover my mouse over this shape and I press L, it will select only this because we removed that inset face over here, and because it is no longer actually connected to this part. Sorry, it will select only this part, and now we can, you know, move. Oh, apologies, that is something we have not covered yet. And you can, you know, make that spaceship fly off into God knows where. Now, finally, let's assume that, oh, I don't know, you have a cylinder here, right? It's a great cylinder, but you know, you might want it to be pointed. You might want it to have a cone on top. Now, instead of having to, you know, go and create a cone, what you can do is instead you can use the poke faces tool. So once again, open up the search bar and type in poke. And it will in short create a vertice at the middle of the selected geometry, and it will connect every single vertice to it. And now you can just sort of extend that upward, and now you have a well, I'm not sure what this shape is actually called, so let's just call it a thing. So yeah, that's that. I think those are all the tools that are to be covered in this lecture. Thank you for watching, and if you have any questions, feel free to message me in DMs. Thank you.